Recently, on a Wednesday night, I was teaching a lesson about how our emotions often cause us to do things that are very extreme. And during this lesson, one of the people actually later on, about a week later, they came to me and they said, one of the examples that you gave me, one of the diagrams that you showed us really stuck with me and really helped me. And I thought if it helped them, maybe it will help others too. So I thought about teaching a lesson, a video lesson, so that it can be spread out to more people than just that classroom. But basically the concept of the diagram that I made, the emotional diagram that I made, was based off of J.C. Peterson's book, his counseling book, Why Don't We Listen Better? Communicating and Connecting in Relationships. And if you guys want to buy that book, I would highly recommend it. It's a good book. I enjoyed reading it, and I think there's a lot of good techniques in there, a lot of counseling techniques for how we can listen better. In this book, he said something very interesting to me. He came up with this concept of a flat brain concept, where when we're emotional, our brain tends to get flatter or something like that. Not physically, but emotionally or mentally. Our thinking goes funny, he says. That is, it resembles the emotions in our stomach. If we're excited, we think, there are no mountains we can't climb. If depressed, life is not worth living. If suspicious, someone tried to scuttle us. And if angry, other people caused all our problems. Says when flat-brained, we like to say crazy things, right? Things that are totally illogical. When we're saying them during these emotional times, we tend to mean them. But then when we take a step back, we're thinking, what were we thinking, right? A child might say to his parents, I hate you. And maybe at that moment, he really does think that he hates his parents. But then later on, when he's not so emotional, he might be like, oh my goodness, why would I say that? A husband might say to his wife, I want a divorce. And maybe at that moment he was upset, he was angry, he was sad, whatever it might have been. And maybe at that moment he really felt like he wanted a divorce. But then later on, after the emotion has gone down, he thinks, what was I thinking? Right? So the point is, I made this kind of this diagram, this concept where when we make decisions, we would likely want to make them in place times when we're neutral, emotionally neutral. So not too emotional, not too low in emotions, whichever way it goes, whether it's happiness or sadness. Usually we think it's okay to make decisions when we're happy, right? But the truth is, how many people maybe they got a bonus, maybe they did something, they got a lot of money and they went and spent it all because they were so happy, and then they're like, why didn't I save some of that? Or why did I spend all that in Vegas? Or whatever it might have been. Sometimes when we're happy, we tend to take risks, we tend to be more generous, we tend to do different things, and sometimes that isn't always a bad thing, but at the same time it can be extreme thinking that we wouldn't have thought when we were emotionally neutral. So the point was, when we make decisions, we tend to want to stay, we will want to stay around the neutral line. Even if we're a little happy, right, we can still make good decisions. Even if we're a little sad, right, we can still make good decisions. But it's the times where we become very happy or we become very sad or very angry, that's when we start thinking illogically, irrationally. We start saying things like, I want a divorce, or I want to kill someone, or I want to get married to some random person because I'm so happy right now, right? We start to think in extreme ways that once those emotions go down, once we go back to the neutral part, we start to think, wow, that was crazy. How could I have ever thought of doing such a thing? So the point is, we have to be careful here. We also have to remember that eventually people, when they are emotional, it's eventually going to go back to the neutral, and once that happens, that tends to be when they start to regret the decisions that they made during the extreme emotions, right? How many times have we said something in our anger that we later regretted? It's because the emotions came down after we were angry, and that's when we started thinking logically, and we started realizing that what we said wasn't really what we meant, or it was what we meant at the time, but it was just crazy thinking, and we regretted it almost immediately. And sometimes it's not immediately. Sometimes it takes days before we regret it. I would encourage you guys that if you get in an argument with someone and somebody's yelling at you and they're angry and they're saying things and maybe it's hurting your feelings, just take a step back and realize they're emotional right now. We need to be showing grace to them. Maybe come back later and ask them about it again, maybe when they're not so emotional, because then they might be thinking more logically. And I think in America right now, of course, we're thinking very emotionally in America. There's a lot of anger and bitterness and sadness right now, and it's causing people to say some very extreme things. I don't have to even quote anything right now. Everyone in America knows the crazy thing that's going on right now, the things that people are doing, the things that people are saying, the things that people are thinking, whatever it might be. There's just very emotional, and as a result, people are saying and doing things that don't make sense. But later on, eventually, we have to remember they're going to go back to that neutral part. And once they go back to the neutral emotions, it can be still happiness or sadness, but as long as it's not too extreme, once they get back to that point, they're going to start thinking more logically and say, oh my goodness, did I really say that, or did I really do that? You think someone who steals from Nike during the riots, comes out of the store yelling, woohoo, I got some Nikes, isn't going to regret it when they get arrested, when they get caught? Obviously, things that we do when we're happy, excited, angry, sad, whatever it might be, we tend to regret later when these things are to an extreme. Again, happiness isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when we get too happy, we need to remember, don't try and make huge decisions or try and realize that you're emotional and try to counter that emotional high by making more logical decisions. Then, of course, when we're angry or when somebody's angry, they tend to affect other people, right? So imagine you're in a room full of people and nobody's really happy, sad. It's not really, maybe they're a little happy, maybe they're a little sad, whatever it might be, but nobody's in an extreme right now. And suddenly someone comes in and they're yelling at everyone saying, how come you guys didn't come out there and help me? And then someone says, well, you didn't ask us to help you. And the other person says, you guys are all being irrational. Why are you guys yelling? And then they're yelling. You see, before that angry person came in there, everyone was neutral. But as soon as the angry person came in there and they started reacting in an angry way, it started affecting other people. And as Christians, I think we need to be careful not to let the emotions of others affect us in a negative way. Again, if people are happy, sure, be happy. But don't try and be so extreme in the sense that you start doing crazy things. And again, especially during this crazy time right now where people are very emotional, I think Christians, the greatest stand that they can take right now is to not be so emotionally extreme. Again, emotions aren't bad. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying once we get in extreme emotions, too much of something good can be bad. And as a result, we tend to overreact or tend to react in extreme ways. So we have to remember that even though they may be at an extreme right now, eventually they're not going to be in the extreme. Eventually they're going to be in neutral, and we need to have a heart of forgiveness and a heart of grace, knowing that eventually they're going to regret what they did. Now, don't get me wrong, people who are killing and rioting and stealing and pillaging and burning down buildings, obviously they will be judged by the justice system. That's the reason we have a justice system. But the point is, we as Christians, we need to be showing love to people. We need to, if somebody comes to us and yells at us and they're angry or they're sad, we need to realize, okay, they're just emotional right now. Let's take a step back and realize that they're emotional right now. And maybe later they'll regret it, and let's forgive them for what they did in their anger or in their sadness or in their happiness, whatever it might be. So anyways, according to J.C. Peterson, he says, I don't think it makes sense to hold what people say or do against them when their brains were flat. In other words, when they were very emotional. If we realize everyone gets flat-brained, extreme emotional, says hurtful things and damages people, we will better be able to accept people and discover forgiveness as a two-way street. Someone said, the more you understand people, the less there is to forgive. And I think that that's certainly a truth that Christians should look for, and there's certainly a biblical truth about forgiveness and grace. Once we've been shown forgiveness, we should also be willing to show forgiveness to others. So that's kind of the lesson. Be careful when you guys are extremely emotional, because you might be doing things that you'll later regret. But also be aware that when people are emotional, when they're saying things that are very irrational, it might just be that the emotions are high. Give them time to let the emotions go down. Talk with them again. Try and have a more logical conversation and be willing to forgive. So yeah, that's the lesson for today.